speaking of football, they got Chip Long coming in as the new offensive coordinator. What kind of changes can we expect with the style of offense and play calling this coming season?
Yeah, I mean, well, you have to first have a view of what the offense has been like the past few seasons to understand the transformation. You get Will Hall, who's the head coach, coming in to Southern Miss, and uh, 2021 was his first year. They go through like 10 to 15 quarterbacks in his first year because every single quarterback
Injuries.
they'd throw out there would get hurt. So
Yeah.
then they eventually just went to Frank Gore Jr. playing quarterback, and they called it the Superback. And so it was never really a serious offense. And then in 2022, you had a quarterback in Ty Keys who gets hurt in the second game, and then you got Trey Lowe who's trying to kind of find his way, and he does fine, but he's not really the quarterback that you would think you'd have on a team that went to a bowl game and won a bowl game. And then last year, they get a transfer from Billy Wiles in from Clemson. They get a transfer in Holman Edwards from Houston, and they think that they're going to be really good there. And they weren't good at the quarterback position. They really lacked the offensive style. Excuse me. Eventually went to freshman Ethan Crawford towards the latter part of the season, and he's obviously in line for the starting job this year. But for the most part, Will Hall has been calling the plays and been sort of the offensive coordinator for Southern Miss, and he stepped back from that role in the middle of the offseason. I mean, the middle of the season last year, and so it was pretty much expected that they would have a different person calling the plays, a different person running the offense. So they bring in Chip Long. And as far as what's going to be different, I think he's going to utilize the tight ends probably a lot more than Southern Miss fans have seen in the past. You're going to have a lot of swing passes, a lot of screen passes, some downfield shots, but a lot of I would say more Power Five style approach to the offense. He has a Notre Dame background actually, so I think you're going to see a lot of things like that. And that's what we've seen in the spring. We've seen a lot of those screens. We've seen a lot of those, those counter plays where you're bringing the right tackle all the way over to the left tackle and kind of that bigger set, almost like a Michigan form run game. Very, very Power Five oriented offense that I think Southern Miss fans haven't seen over the past couple of years.
So staying with the offensive side, where you talked about Billy Wiles coming over in the transfer portal, and they get another quarterback in the transfer portal and bringing over Tate Rodemaker from Florida State. How did this competition shake out during the spring with, you talked about I think he was a true freshman, might have been a redshirt freshman, Ethan Crawford.
Yeah, and you throw in Billy Wiles in there throughout the spring, and you throw in the freshman they got from MRA, which is Madison Ridgeland Academy here in Mississippi. Very talented freshman in John White. So you basically had a four-way quarterback battle here in the spring until the day after spring training finished, when Billy Wiles announced he's going to be in the transfer portal. So that kind of brought the quarterback position back down to a three-way race. And I'm telling you, I mean, if I had to pick, I would say Ethan Crawford probably came out of the spring camp as far as maybe you would say the front runner. But, I mean, I still think it's very much anyone's job. I mean, John White is probably the best freshman quarterback that they've gotten in here in a long time. I mean, he's a very talented dual threat guy, can pin place the ball. A lot of people remember him in Mississippi for coming down to Oak Grove, which is a public school, and Madison Ridgeland Academy, not a public school. Big for them to come to a game like that. Oak Grove, won the state high school tournament, state's tournament, state championship here in Mississippi. They went down to Oak Grove in their home stadium and basically came a 2-point conversion away from beating them. And John White did that. And Will Hall was on the field. I was standing actually next to Will Hall on the field, and he was watching his quarterback recruit almost beat Oak Grove. So I think John White has a good chance. You mentioned Tate Rodemaker. I mean, it's a Power Five guy. I mean, they try to get Power Five guys in. You look at Billy Wiles, but this is a guy who actually has playing experience, unlike Billy Wiles does. Rodemaker starting in that Florida game. He started in several games for Florida State last year, who was by all means in very much a position to compete for a college football national championship. Obviously, he wasn't starting over Jordan Travis, but after Jordan Travis came out, I mean, he was in there. So he has real game experience. And then, like you said, Ethan Crawford. I mean, this is a guy who can run. I think he just brings such a different element because of his legs. He has a power arm, probably the best arm out of the three of them. So it's going to be interesting. I don't think you have a definite starter, obviously. And fall camp, somebody's going to have to take reins. But if I had to guess someone who's leading coming out of spring, I would say Ethan Crawford probably. But you don't want to say that if you're Will Hall, because you don't want anybody to transfer out, obviously.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
In this day and age, for sure.
Yeah, we are
Right.
recording this here on Monday, April 15th. We got the portal opening up, and we got a 2-week span where everyone's trying to hold on to everybody and maybe get some positions that they need. So after Crawford, if that's where you think they currently sit, who do you think then is 2 and 3?
Well, I don't think Crawford is really that much in front, but if I had to name a 2 and 3, I'd say you got to put Tate Rodemaker in there at 2 just because of his experience, and John White at 3. And the only reason I say that, I mean, John White's a true freshman, and I don't really know how many Southern Miss fans really want another true freshman going out there and taking snaps in a year where Will Hall has to get it done. I mean, he has to start winning in this program. Fourth year, all he's talked about is winning. And he knows it. He said it. He said he's proud of the way they built it. He's proud of the way they've recruited, but he knows it's time to win. And so I think you got to pick the quarterback who's going to best position you to win games. And maybe that is Rodemaker even over Crawford. Or maybe they could use Crawford still in the game. He's just not the quarterback one. But I would say I would be very surprised if John White was the starting quarterback on day one. It could change in the middle of the season, but against Kentucky on the road, I'd say you got to go most likely with Rodemaker or Ethan Crawford.
Moving on to the running back room, where they lose longtime stalwart Frank Gore Jr. off to the NFL, but you do return Rodriguez Clark and Kenyon Clay. How did that running back room look in the spring?
Well, I mean, they call him Dreek Clark here at Southern Miss. That guy is ginormous. He's definitely going to be your all-purpose back for basically every down. And like you mentioned, Kenyon Clay, he's kind of that secondary back. But Dreek Clark, I wouldn't say – I mean, obviously you lose Frank Gore Jr., who's generational talent. But, I mean, I don't think that it's like a massive drop-off to Dreek Clark. Dreek Clark is big. He can get up and down the field. I compare him to a bowling ball where he's just that muscular. And, if he's getting, tackled in the backfield, he's falling forward for 2 or 3 yards. He's not going to take tackles for loss. And then if he gets that burst of speed, you can forget it. So he's just a big back, and you really question not necessarily about the running back room, but if the offensive line can open up holes for him.
How did so you had a true freshman there that I was pretty excited about, early enrollee and Jalen Washington. How did he look this spring, and what kind of role can we expect for him, you think, in 2024?
Yeah, he looked great in the spring. Him and JQ Gray. JQ, they call him Bolt. JQ Gray, he's another one of those younger running backs. Yeah, I mean, like you said, Jalen Washington looked very well, good in spring. Actually, in the first spring practice, he had all the touchdowns. Nobody else had a touchdown other than him. He had 3 that day. So gets a good up and down back. As far as how you can see his role in the 2024 season, I mean, you could see him potentially come in a couple of spots. But I don't think he's going to have a central role in the offense unless obviously one of the other two goes down.
I think I saw something, or I don't believe it's something that you wrote. I think it was something from the local newspaper guy, but they predicted Washington kind of like number 3 on the depth chart behind Clark and Clay, and I mean that was really positive news, I thought. But that running back room definitely needs some depth. So kind of interesting to hear that you have the 2 young guys there look pretty good in the spring.
No, I was just going to comment. Yeah, that's what I would have it too. Probably Jalen Washington at that 3, JQ Gray at that 4. And again, they can kind of go in and out of that. You can have a Rodriguez Clark getting you those, Dreek Clark getting you those 5-6 yards. Then if you need that 1 yard kind of burst to the edge, you bring in JQ Gray on a jet sweep or Jalen Washington on a halfback dive or something like that.
And just for our listeners, I did look up Dreek Clark, 5'10", 200 pounds. I know sometimes the schools maybe fudge the numbers a little bit. Does that sound about right? Does he look all of 200 pounds and 5'10"?
Yeah.
Okay.
No doubt.
All right.
I'm telling you, he legitimately looks like a bowling ball. I mean, he's so hard to bring down. It's all muscle. And I would get out of the way. I wouldn't try to tackle him.
All right. The wide receiver room took a hit this offseason between graduation and the transfer, losing 3 of their top 4 wide receivers, and Ty Mims being one of the lone returnees. How did the wide receiver room look this spring, and who stood out?
Yeah, I mean that's a room that you're really questioning about what they can do with that room, because you lost a lot of your talent there. You bring back Ty Mims, as you said. He's kind of your slot receiver, and they used him a lot in the spring. He actually sat out for I think the first week or so of spring, so they didn't or a week in spring. So he was out for a while. He got us a chance to see some of those other players. A player that I would mention would be J.J. Butler. He's kind of their bigger guy on the outside, trying to replace Ja'Karius Caston. He's a transfer, or rather, he's a freshman. Excuse me. He's not the transfer. Larry Simmons is the transfer from Ole Miss, but he's the freshman. Will Hall still wants to see him kind of come into that wide receiver role on the outside. He's big, he's tall, he gets good separation, but he hasn't been able to find that ball skills or the run after catch yet that they want to see throughout the season. Then all the other guys I mentioned, Larry Simmons, they all looked decent, but again, it's still spring. It's really hard to take a lot from the wide receivers in spring, because also you have to remember too that the defensive backfield for the defense was very depleted this spring. Most of the starters sat out, so you're not really getting good analytical data against probably one of the better secondaries in the Sun Belt with those wide receivers. So I think you're going to see a lot. You're going to have a lot of those answers in the fall, I think, more so than this spring.
Earlier, you mentioned, you thought that the tight end would be used more than what we have seen in the past. And we know they lose Cole Cavallo off to graduation. Was there a tight end that kind of stood out in the spring?
Yeah, I mean, they got the transfer in, or rather the freshman in that they really wanted in the recruiting portal. He's a big guy. I'm just drawing blank on his name. But he's a big guy there at the tight end space. I think it's another part of the offense where they really hope that they're going to be good enough. But again, like you said, they're losing so much talent on those skill players that a lot of people are questioning this offense and how good they can be come time to play some football in the fall.
The offensive line will need to be rebuilt after losing its top 4 offensive linemen from a year ago in terms of snaps. How did that group look this spring?
Yeah, they got some work to do in the offensive line, and they had their moments. They had certain moments where they looked, decent. But the offensive line, to me, is one of the outside the wide receiver room is the biggest question mark, because it's what's really held them back over the last 2 years. I think of last year. I mean, every single time Billy Wiles would take a snap, there'd be somebody in his face, and I saw a lot of that in the spring. And there were days where the offensive line looked good, but they're going to have to get exceptionally better. They are still pretty young at that spot, so they hope that some of that experience from last year can carry over to this season and see. I do think they're going to be better on the offensive line than last year, but I don't think they're going to be like tremendously good. But I think the good thing for the offensive line is that they're facing probably one of the best group of 5 defensive lines in the country that Southern Miss has. It's definitely the strength of the team. So to face that every single day in practice is nothing but beneficiary to the offensive line. And that's something that Hall said when I asked him about it 2 or 3 weeks ago. He said it's just huge that the offensive line gets to face that kind of defensive presence on the defensive line for the better half of spring, and then obviously all of fall camp.
Following back up on the tight end, was that Teron Bedford that who you were talking about?
Yes. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you.
So he's, just for people listening, he's a enrollee, 6'4", 255. per I think 24/7 Sports. So
Early and early. Yeah.
If you had to pick one player on this offense to kind of have a breakout type season, who would that be?
I would say Drew Clark, because he was really held back because of Frank Gore Jr. Of what he could really do on the running back room. I think he's in prime time position to have a standout role on the offense, especially with how much Chip Long likes to run the ball. He came in saying he's going to want to run the ball. He came in saying that's going to be a focus, and I think he's going to have a lot of opportunity, and I think he could have a very big season. It's again whether or not the offensive line can block for him, and if they can, and he gets into that second level, he could have a really big year.
One, two.